Hello everybody, I'm Marc.antomattei and this is my wristwatch collection. I guess before we go ahead and get started, it's customary for me to do a honorary wristwatch check. On the wrist now is an Omega Time Swatch Moonwatch, but this isn't any old one. This is the one with a Moonshine gold chronograph hand with pink lume on it. So very limited edition, only came out for one day. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and start off with the big one here. The first watch that I'm gonna show off is the Omega Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch. This has always been and still is my grill watch to this day. And this is actually the first luxury wristwatch that I've ever purchased. If you guys seen the video, you seen that I was out with the Rolex guy, Austin Daniels, here in Tokyo, Japan. And we went to Nakano Broadway where I bought this watch. And since we're still inside the Omega realm, I showed you guys my very first luxury watch purchase, and now I'm going to show you guys my latest luxury watch purchase. This is the greatest Bond watch ever made. This is the Omega Seamaster. The reference number on this one is 220.80.00. And this is the watch that was worn by Mr. Daniel Craig inside of my favorite James Bond movie of all time, Casino Royale. When he's on the train with Vesper Lynn is when he introduces this watch, and you can also see him wearing this watch with his tuxedo inside the casino as he's playing poker.
Rolex?
Omega.
Beautiful.
The reason that I really like this watch is that, unlike its predecessor, this one has applied indices which look so much better than what it did before, as well as it also has applied logos on there. So that's that watch. And since we're talking about James Bond, I might as well just show you guys my other Bond watch, which is the very first Bond watch ever worn on screen. And this one was worn by Mr. Sean Connery inside of the movie Dr. No at the beginning of the movie and when the character was introduced. And he said his famous lines.
Bond. James Bond.
He was wearing this one on the wrist. This is a Gruen Precision. The reference number is 510, and this one has 17 jewels inside. This one came out in the late 50s, or it could be early 60s, but I would place this watch at being at least 60 years of age. Don't ask me about it. It's a secret, as they say. I have another Gruen watch. This one is also a 510 movement, but this one has a special dial that has all of these Masonic symbols going around as the hour markers. Now, I may or may not be a Freemason, but I'm not going to speak to that inside of this video. Now, there's one more thing that I'd like to say about Gruen before I close out on them. Although they originally made watches in Cincinnati, Ohio, they also had their own factory in Bill, Switzerland, where they made such movements as their precision movements, and this is their top of the line. A little known fact is that they made some movements for Rolex, and Rolex made some movements for Gruen. You could take the mainspring out of a Rolex and you could put it into a Gruen, or you could take the center wheel out of a Gruen and you could put it into a Rolex, and both watches would work just fine. The only difference between the two really is just the name on the dial. And there was a time that Gruen almost merged with Rolex until a depression hit. All right, speaking of Rolex, let me show off my one and only Rolex, which went from being my least favorite out of all of Rolex's releases to possibly being my favorite. This is the Rolex Explorer II. Now, the very first wristwatch that I owned that I purchased is when I was about 20 years old, and I was entering the United States Air Force. I graduated from basic training, and as a celebration present to myself, I bought myself a fossil blue watch from the BX that cost me about 50 bucks. And it was an all steel watch, and it had a steel bezel to it, and it had the paint inside of the hour markers such as it does on this one. And I remember all of the paint was coming off and it was just leaving a steel bezel. I absolutely adored that watch at the time that I bought it, but by the time that paint started coming off of it, it just looked ugly. And every time that I saw an Explorer 2 with this steel bezel, it used to remind me of that watch and how much I disliked it at the time. But over time, I've come to love this watch, and this is the only proper tool watch that is still out that is not a piece of jewelry inside of Rolex's collection. There's no precious metals that you're going to find on this one. This one is purely purpose built with no type of status associated with it, aside from the crown on the dial. But you know, there's that. All right, getting into my Seiko collection. Aside from the Omega Time Swatch Moonwatch that I'm wearing now, this is the only quartz watch that I have. This one is designed by the guy that designed the DeLorean car that you see inside of Back to the Future. This is a Giugiaro design Seiko chronograph, and this watch actually appeared inside of the movie Aliens, with Sigourney Weaver's character Ripley wearing this on the wrist in the movie. Supposed to be a futuristic piece, and it's one of my favorites. All right, the next piece is my beloved King Seiko. This is not the reissue of this watch that has come out recently inside the world. This is the original version of this watch with the 44-9990 movement inside. This is a nice mechanical movement. This is a very beautiful watch, and instead of buying the reissue, I thought, why not go for the quote-unquote so-called real thing from the past, which actually has a better movement inside of it than the newer one. And as you guys can see, I put a special exhibition case back on the back so I can look at that beautiful movement inside of there and protect the jewel, the coin that I originally had on the case back. But this is absolutely one of my favorite watches to wear, and it's a nice dress watch. And since I'm pretending to be a social climber here with Seiko, going up from quartz to a mechanical movement, here we got my Grand Seiko Shunbun, and this one has a special dial that has no bezel to it, and the dial looks like a cherry blossom. And depending on the right type of light that you look at it in, it could either appear white or silverish or gray, or if you're under the right lighting conditions, you're going to see that pink on the dial there, which is absolutely beautiful. This is probably, bar none, the best movement that I have inside of any of my watches. The accuracy is unreal with this titanium watch, and it feels absolutely great on the wrist. All right, thank you for watching. That's all, folks.